Presentation on corruption in Southern American countries, dealing with their politics, economics, and other points. Its history, what causes it, and how we can possibly help to prevent it. So, for the background of it, corruption in Southern American countries has been, of course, in the news a lot in the last couple of years, or decades, but it has been around for much longer than that. And even though it's skyrocketed with major scandals going on that you see coming out of these countries, it's a rampant thing that usually happens and is almost a norm in these countries. And why people say it's massively rampant and that it's a growing problem is, well, partially it's blamed on democrat democratization and the idea of dispersing power, because in these countries, when you're moving from a more authoritarian or another type of government to a democracy, you're dispersing power to others, and in this it is almost bad. It is bad because when you disperse the more power, the more liability there is, and the easier it is almost to essentially be able to have corruption. And you're by dispersing power, you're planting the seeds of corruption to grow and become a rampant problem. Now, one way this usually happens is the with a free market reform. Now, due to the effects of colonialism that happened in these countries hundreds of years ago, many countries tried to reform their current economic systems to more free markets. But the problems with this is that when they're moving from their system to a free market, it has at least a period that's uncertain to many, and many will take advantage of this by handing out bribes and using any means of corruption to help them clarify the rules and make it more clear to them, but also in their own agenda. And what happens when you move from the freer market is that with privatization, you're you're allowing corruption to grow, because with these privatized industries, people can now have that window of opportunity, be able to spread, what they want to do, and be able to have their corruption grow from that time. And then when the new system is finally implemented, it's already there and it's happening. And then with the government, whenever a certain type of government tries to do this type of reform shift, it again allows for an open window of people to be able to use loopholes and unclarified rules to be able to have this corruption and essentially just kind of backstab the process that's going on. State intervention is another thing that helps um, enable corruption. It allows people to enable bribes, because if the state is intervening, whoever they're intervening on the behalf of is able to take that opportunity and to go to politicians or people in politics and be able to bribe them and start a kind of branch of corruption from there. A good example would be Mexico in the 1970s when they had their oil boom, and this happens in a lot of Southern and Latin American countries. They had an oil boom in the 70s, and then by the 80s they fell off. The same thing happened with Venezuela with their economy. And basically, what this kind of leads to is that when you're given, even when the state intervenes and they take a portion of it, that portion is put in the hands of policymakers, lawmakers, politicians, and this vast amount of resources they can use in their own form of corruptions to be able to have this seemingly large amount of whatever it is, whether it be oil, money, whatever, to use that in order to be able to enable corruption from people, whether it be non-state actors or other state actors, to be able to keep the spread going. And then the irony of a state intervention is that, yeah, we think that a state intervention would lead to less corruption, but the reality is it just kind of fuels it more, again, with consolidating things in the hands of people. And it also allows entrepreneurs to get their way, with them seeing the golden opportunity with these politicians and them being able to, bribe them into doing what they want. Democratization is a form that people say helps fuel corruption, and it's mainly focused on a shift from authoritarian to democracy. And what happens when you go from it is, with democracies, people can very easily be able to take economic resources and have them monopolized and have them under their control and total control, and really just create something that they can have complete power over that's theirs, and that's it. Like, their word is their word. They can be corrupt as ever they want because they essentially just own all of what they have. And with democratization and switching to democracy, it increases the amount of actors in the political scene. Which, again, if there's more actors and already running corruption, these actors can be easily influenced to also be corrupt at some point. Meaning that even if, yeah, like the government takes control of some people who are corrupt, there are people in, well, the larger amount of actors would be able to just keep growing and growing since there's a mass amount. But although it demo, demo, although this process can lead to a lot more corruption, it can also raise accountability for the actions of people, which is sort of an irony, I guess, to it. And then, sorry about that. For the effects of corruption, there's a lot of effects due to these countries being more fragile and people there being a lot more desperate, a lot more people willing to be paid off for votes, and there's about and then some countries there's a 1 in 4 person ratio of people who get bribed to vote for certain parties or candidates. Um, and also in these countries, there's a culture of retaliation that if you pour rampant corruption, you will have retaliation taken against you, which about 3/4 of the people who do present like cases of corruption do have retaliation taken against them. So it has like it kind of feeds the sense of don't report it. Resentment, obviously, towards the government. Many people do not view certain governments well because of the corruption they are engaged in, which can lead to violent outbursts and protests that strike the nation and stop a whole series of things. But that can also lead to the clash with the already damaged police culture of abuse, neglect, and just lack of human rights that goes on. And women suffer a lot from corruption due to them being able to being easily susceptible to corruption for better healthcare purposes, better anything they really need to provide for their family. But it also leads them to end up engaging in sexual acts in order for them to be able to have what they desire. And Now to two examples. One of them is Venezuela, and the again, as I mentioned, the oil boom that happened in the 1970s. That happened with a lot of Venezuelan, or not Venezuelan, Southern American countries. And what happened was when they found this oil, I think they took in oil, vast quantities of oil. They took control of it, but by the 80s, it, well, in the process of the 70s, the 80s was leading to a slide in their economy, and by the 80s, the Venezuelan economy fell. And this led to the more rampant rampant and widespread corruption throughout the country. As since the economy failed, people were able to take liberty of that and do essentially what they saw fit, and corruption with businesses, politicians, criminals. And from here, it just skyrocketed into massive amounts of corruption, with Venezuela ending up having some of the highest corruption rates in Southern America. And another famous example would be Operation Car Wash. It is probably the most famous corruption scandal to ever happen in Southern America. It took place in Brazil, and Brazil is being monitored for having small car washing businesses act as a, well, not as well, it would act as money laundering businesses from small criminals and gangs. But when dug deeper, it further led into the corruption, to the money laundering going to oil companies that were present in Brazil, and from there, from the companies, it would end up into political offices. And because of this, many Brazilian oil companies had to shut down some of their workings to stop this corruption, and Brazil would end up suffering, internationally from, and would lose confidence and would get confidence lost from all of the nations that the Olympics couldn't even mitigate, due to the fact that corruption scandals started from small money laundering businesses and car washes all the way up to political offices in the country. Um, The main solution people have is ironically democracy, even though that's what many say is the cause of this. And democracy is because it can help to stop by implementing systems of checks and balances. Now with these countries, they don't seem to have a lot of systems of checks and balances in the government would be able to obviously hold checks on each branches and balance them out between them, effectively limiting not. There's no way that the corruption will be able to stop the rise, but it'll limit it to a certain point, and checks and balances will be able to limit it to a significant extent. And then democracy would also be able to fix the economic problems racking these countries, which also leads to it because many people will be willing to be bribed or get into corruption just so they can have a better living style overall and a better economic situation. And thank you for watching my presentation.